Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. I was just trying to be fair. And with that, we're turning to Chairman Bowman for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Lucas, for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I want to call attention to the fact that the latest IPCC report, I believe for the first time, explicitly calls out settler colonialism and capitalism as major causes of climate vulnerability. For example, it says that present development challenges causing high vulnerability are influenced by historical and ongoing patterns of inequity, such as colonialism, especially for many indigenous peoples and local communities. It says that colonialism and capitalism have dispossessed indigenous peoples and disrupted culturally significant multi-species relationships. This question is for Dr. David Chavez. Thank you so much for your testimony. How is settler colonialism and capitalism linked to the current climate emergency that we are all faced with and dealing with?
Thank you so much. I appreciate this question and this historical context. Here, we're in a young colonial nation. We all bear the legacy of colonization and the agendas driven by colonization, how they've impacted our relationship as land stewards. And indigenous peoples, over 500 nations, sovereign nations here in the US, and many more states recognize indigenous communities, especially many in North Carolina, and also non-federally recognized indigenous communities in the US territories, for example, have been stewarding and managing the land with a lot of the same solutions and strategies that we're now finally looking to today, 5 centuries later, and have been doing so for generations, centuries, and millennia for many communities. And colonization has really dispossessed indigenous peoples of that land and severed the ability to uphold those customary responsibilities that many of our governing bodies, many of our community members take to be their inherent right and responsibility to take care of those lands. And so really that's been one of the biggest impacts, but also the education system pushing us away from these valuable bodies of knowledge, including scientific ways of knowing, that we're now working to make sure we can reconnect to and that we can share those with all the newcomers who share these lands with us now. There are some really, really great examples, though, that I want to highlight of how people are addressing those colonial legacies. We don't have national policy, as I mentioned, as many other colonial nations do, around truth and reconciliation, and that creates a big barrier for us in having to educate our colleagues and our peers here in this nation. But we do have some great indigenous scientists and leaders that are leading the way and showing how we can work through those colonial legacies and challenges to continue to apply some of those responsibilities, some of those land management techniques that have helped us for so long today. And I wanted to highlight from North Carolina also Ryan Lumby's work as a leading hydrologist that's looking at using the best scientific technology available and indigenous ways of knowing to assess how we can address flood risk. Dr. Carletta Chief in the Southwest, who's leading the Indigenous Resilience Networks. And we have a lot of other examples of—
I want to try to squeeze in another question. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for that. The IPCC report says that global investment in climate action is up to 6 times lower than what is needed by 2030. It also notes that public and private finance flows for fossil fuels are still greater than those for adaptation and mitigation. We are all very familiar with how the fossil fuel industry has lied to the public over decades and continues to lobby against climate action and for more fossil fuel growth, even though their existing infrastructure is enough to blow the world past safe levels of warming. My question for the panel: why aren't we mobilizing our society on a wartime footing to deploy renewable energy and create millions of good union jobs starting in marginalized communities? Why are we risking the future of humanity to protect the fossil fuel industry? We can start with Cole Barrett, please.
Well, thank you for your question. I think
I think an answer that I'd like to share is that we actually are setting forth on the path to address this issue. It is not a question of us, standing still. We have shown that, if we invest now, we can avoid damages, especially in adaptation, sooner than later. And it's really important to do that. It's true that if you look at the commitments that countries have made to developing countries, we have not met those commitments.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time. I yield back.